The following days at Station Ardent passed in a blur of activity and discovery. Jake settled into a routine, moving from one engineering task to another, but his attention kept returning to Lyra. She moved through the station with a quiet efficiency, always bending in her peculiar manner, yet somehow blending humility with an unmistakable presence. What puzzled him most was how natural it seemed to her, as if every bend, every gesture, was part of an invisible rhythm of the station itself. Jake had tried to ask some of the other crew members about her behavior, but their responses were vague. "It's just Xiran custom," they said, as if that explained everything. Jake wanted more than vague explanations. He wanted to understand. He wanted to grasp not only the gestures but the reasoning, the intelligence behind them. Every time Lyra bent, it felt like she was communicating something beyond the reach of words. One morning, Jake was in the engineering bay when an alert flashed on his console. A minor malfunction in one of the station's secondary power conduits had triggered an automatic safety lockdown. He rushed to investigate, but before he could reach the affected module, Lyra appeared beside him. She had been quietly cleaning nearby, yet she moved with the same calm purpose she always had. "You will need assistance," she said, bowing slightly in her customary gesture. "The system is more complex than it appears." Jake hesitated. "I think I can handle it." "You may try, but caution is advised," Lyra replied. Errors could spread across multiple sectors. Reluctantly, Jake nodded. They worked side by side, Jake manipulating the human-engineered interfaces while Lyra interfaced with the alien components. Her knowledge was profound. She understood the Xiran-designed energy flow intuitively, guiding Jake through the process with precise gestures, subtle movements, and occasional verbal instructions. As he followed her lead, Jake began to notice patterns in her bowing and bending. A slight forward tilt of her torso meant she was signaling a potential hazard. A low sweep of her hands indicated a priority system. Her gestures were part of a living language, and Jake realized that he had been learning it unconsciously just by observing her. By the time the conduit was stabilized, Jake was panting from exertion and amazement. He looked at Lyra, who stood straight and composed, her multicolored skin glowing faintly under the overhead lights. That was incredible," he said. "I didn't know a janitor could—" "You know," she interrupted with a small laugh that sounded almost musical. "I am not only a janitor. That is my position on the station, yes. But I am trained in maintenance, systems analysis, and emergency response. You see, appearances are often deceiving." Jake felt a mix of respect and humility. He had assumed her role meant she only cleaned floors and mopped corridors. Instead, he had discovered that she was a formidable mind, disciplined, highly trained, and yet unassuming. He realized he had been judging her based on appearances alone, a mistake that humans often made when encountering alien cultures. Over the next week, Jake spent more time working with Lyra. They developed a rhythm, a subtle communication through gestures and shared understanding. He noticed how her bending was not just a formality, but a signal of trust. When she bowed fully in his presence, it was a sign that she relied on him to handle a task responsibly. When she bent lightly, it was an acknowledgement of his effort or attention. Slowly, Jake began to respond in kind, awkward at first, but gradually with a fluidity that mirrored her own movements. One afternoon, as they were repairing a delicate interface in the station's hydroponic module, Jake finally asked the question that had been nagging him. Why do you do it all the time? Even when there's nothing to clean or no one to greet?" Lyra paused, considering him. She tilted her head, letting the light catch the shimmer of her skin. "It is customary," she said, "but it is also a discipline. It trains focus, humility, and awareness. It reminds me of my place in the larger pattern of the station and of the galaxy. Each bend is a choice, a conscious act of respect for the systems, the people, and the environment." Jake stared at her, realizing that the gesture he had once found confusing now seemed deeply meaningful. It was not awkward or flirtatious, it was a statement of intention, a living philosophy in motion. He wondered how many humans could understand such subtlety. As the days passed, Jake began to notice other patterns in her behavior. Her cleaning was meticulous, almost ritualistic, and yet her attention always extended beyond mere tasks. She observed the engineer's work, the movements of visiting delegations, the flow of energy through the station, and the subtle cues of other species. It was as if she were simultaneously a janitor, an engineer and a student of the galaxy all rolled into one. One evening, while Jake was reviewing schematics in the observation deck, the station shuddered. A deep rumble echoed through the hull and the lights flickered. He raced to the engineering bay, fearing another malfunction, and found Lyra already there, crouched over a console. Her hands moved with precision across the alien interface, and her body bent in a series of subtle signals. "You found it," Jake said, breathless. "The core instability." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused. "It is delicate. A small error could trigger a cascade." Together they worked, their movements synchronized. Jake followed her instructions, watching as she bent, tilted, and gestured in ways that communicated more than words ever could. Slowly, the crisis stabilized. The energy flow normalized, and the alarm ceased. Jake leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Lyra inclined her head in a formal bow. "No thanks are necessary. You have observed, learned, and assisted. That is sufficient." Jake realized then that this was more than teamwork. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and understanding. He had come to the station thinking he would teach humans about alien technology, but instead he was learning from someone he had almost dismissed. Lyra's bending gestures, once a source of confusion, had become a language of trust and guidance. In the following days, Jake's understanding deepened. He began noticing subtleties he had missed before. The slight lean of her body when signaling caution, the way her tendrils shifted color to indicate focus or urgency, the rhythm of her steps when moving through the corridors. Each movement was meaningful, a code embedded in her very being. He started experimenting, responding with his own gestures. Sometimes a nod, sometimes a small bow, sometimes a pause to acknowledge her signals. She responded in kind, and a silent dialogue developed between them. It was fragile, tentative, but growing stronger with each interaction. One morning, as they were inspecting a maintenance shaft, a visiting delegation of aliens arrived unexpectedly. They were tall and insectoid, with multiple eyes and chittering voices that communicated in a frequency beyond human hearing. Jake froze, unsure how to proceed. Lyra bent slightly, a deep, deliberate bow signaling him to remain calm. She moved with precision, communicating through posture, gesture, and subtle signals that Jake struggled to interpret. Slowly, he understood. She was guiding him, showing him how to navigate the delegation's presence, when to speak, when to step back, when to observe. By the time the delegation departed, Jake felt a new respect for Lyra's abilities. She had not only managed a complex social interaction, but had done so with elegance, subtlety, and authority. He realized that her position as a janitor had given her a unique perspective. She could move unnoticed, observe without interference, and act decisively when needed. That evening, Jake sat alone in the observation deck, looking out at the planet below. The lavender clouds reflected the twin suns, casting a surreal glow across the landscape. He thought about the station, the delegation, and most of all, Lyra. She had changed his perception of what a janitor could be, what a gesture could mean, and how understanding another culture could reveal strength and intelligence where he least expected it. A small note appeared on his console. It was in Xeran script, intricate and flowing, but Jake had begun to recognize the patterns. He translated it slowly. "Observation is the path to understanding. Trust grows through attention and respect." Jake smiled. That was Lyra. Always teaching, always guiding, always bending in ways that seemed strange but carried profound meaning. As he prepared for sleep, Jake felt a surge of anticipation. He had come to Station Ardent to work, to fix systems, and to contribute to human knowledge. Instead, he had discovered a living lesson in patience, cultural awareness, and unexpected brilliance. The janitor was not just a janitor. She was a teacher, a guardian, and perhaps the key to understanding the galaxy in ways he had never imagined. He lay down, eyes on the glowing horizon, and thought about the days to come. Challenges awaited, systems would fail, and the station would demand all his skill. But with Lyra's guidance, he felt ready. Her bending gestures, once a source of awkwardness and confusion, had become a symbol of partnership, trust, and possibility. Jake closed his eyes, knowing that the story of the human and the janitor was just beginning. There would be tests of skill, moments of danger, and opportunities for discovery, and through it all he would learn, adapt, and grow, Guided by the quiet, elegant, and endlessly surprising presence of Lyra, the janitor who bent not out of subservience, but out of wisdom, discipline, and a deep understanding of the universe. The following week brought unexpected challenges to Station Ardent. The station had functioned smoothly since Jake's arrival, but now a deep rumble shook the corridors as alarms blared across the decks. The primary energy core, the heart of the station, was fluctuating dangerously. Engineers scrambled to the control bays, and crew members shouted orders in a mixture of alien languages. Jake's heart raced as he realized the situation was far more serious than any previous malfunction he had encountered. He grabbed his tools and sprinted toward the core, weaving through panicked personnel. At the entrance to the core chamber, he froze. The machinery was massive, alien in design, with energy conduits twisting like living vines and lights flickering in alarming patterns. Sparks danced across the floor as the power surged and died in uneven pulses. Jake's training as a human engineer was valuable, but much of this technology was Xeran in origin, operating on principles he had only begun to understand. Before panic could overwhelm him, a familiar figure appeared. Lyra moved swiftly, bending low in her customary manner as she passed the entrance threshold, signaling calm and focus. Her tendrils shimmered with urgency, shifting color to indicate tension, yet her posture was precise and controlled. "You should step back," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "This core is unstable. One wrong move could cascade through the station." Jake swallowed hard. "I can help," he said, trying to mask the nervousness in his voice. "You can," Lyra replied, "but you must follow my lead." Together they entered the core chamber. Jake tried to analyze the situation, but the complexity of Xeran energy systems was overwhelming. Lyra bent low, her hands tracing the glowing conduits, each movement deliberate. She gestured toward a junction, then leaned forward slightly, signaling him to adjust a stabilizer. Jake followed her instructions, hands trembling but precise. As they worked, Jake began to understand that her bending was not just custom, it was communication. A subtle tilt to the left indicated a minor surge. A low sweep of her hands meant redirect energy through a secondary channel. Her posture and gestures formed a living language, and Jake realized he had been learning it for weeks without noticing. He responded with nods, small gestures and timing that matched her rhythm, creating a silent dialogue that guided their every move. Suddenly, a secondary surge hit the system, forcing Jake to react quickly. He almost misaligned a conduit, but Lyra bent sharply, a flash of violet light on her skin signaling immediate correction. He adjusted in time, preventing a catastrophic overload. "You are improving," Lyra said, her voice calm but approving. "Observation and adaptation are your strengths." Jake felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he truly felt part of this alien environment, not as an outsider, but as a partner. He was learning to think like a Xeran engineer, guided by their logic and discipline, yet blending it with human intuition and improvisation. Hours passed in tense collaboration. Sparks flew, alarms rang, and the chamber shook intermittently, but slowly, methodically, they stabilized the core. Jake worked tirelessly, following Lyra's precise directions, and together they restored balance to the energy flow. When the last alarm ceased, the room fell silent except for the hum of the fully functional core. Jake leaned against a console, breathing heavily. He looked at Lyra, who stood tall despite the exertion, her skin rippling softly in calm patterns. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. She inclined her head in a low bow, her eyes reflecting quiet amusement. "Thanks are unnecessary. You followed, observed, and acted. That is sufficient." "That is the Xeran way of collaboration." Jake nodded, understanding the meaning behind her words. It was more than gratitude. It was respect, recognition, and trust. After the incident, the station's crew gathered to assess the core. Engineers who had previously ignored or underestimated Lyra now looked at her with new eyes. Her status as a janitor had obscured her abilities, but the truth was undeniable. She was a master of the station's systems, capable of handling crises that even seasoned engineers struggled to manage. Jake spent the next days working closely with Lyra, learning not just the technical aspects of the station but also the subtleties of Xeran culture. He realized that their customs, particularly her bending gestures, were deeply intertwined with their approach to problem-solving and communication. Every motion carried information, intention, and strategy. One afternoon, they were tasked with inspecting a high-risk energy relay on the station's exterior. The job required them to leave the safety of the station and venture into the void, tethered only by safety lines. Jake felt a pang of fear as he glanced at the open space surrounding them. But Lyra remained calm, bending slightly with each step, signaling caution, awareness, and rhythm. "Trust your movements," she said, her voice steady. "Every action matters. Panic is a failure you cannot afford." Jake followed her lead, moving with care. He noticed how her gestures guided not just the task but also his own emotional state, instilling calm, focus, and confidence. When a loose panel threatened to drift into the void, she bent low, her hands sweeping in a precise motion to secure it, and Jake mirrored her movements, stabilizing the equipment. By the time they completed the inspection, Jake was exhausted but exhilarated. He understood now that Lyra's gestures, once confusing, were a masterful blend of culture, training, and instinct. They were not mere customs, they were tools, strategies, and expressions of intelligence. That evening, Jake sat in the observation deck reviewing data from the day. He thought about the core crisis, the external relay inspection, and every small moment where Lyra had guided him through subtle gestures. He realized that humans, in many ways, relied too heavily on spoken language, overlooking the power of silent communication, observation, and understanding. Lyra had taught him that strength and intelligence often came in quiet, unexpected forms. A notification on his console drew his attention. It was a message from the station's central command. The core incident had been reported to the Galactic Alliance. Jake scanned the report and saw that Lyra had been credited as the lead problem solver, though she remained modest in description, her role listed as janitorial support. He smiled, knowing that those who truly understood her abilities would never be surprised. The next day, Jake was assigned a new project, recalibrating the station's environmental systems. He knew it would be complex, involving both human and Xeran interfaces. Lyra joined him, bending lightly in her customary way, her presence both reassuring and inspiring. As they worked, Jake found himself anticipating her gestures, understanding the flow of her communication without words. He realized that he was no longer an outsider. He was part of a team that transcended species, relying on respect, trust, and shared purpose. During a brief pause, Jake glanced at Lyra. She was adjusting a panel, her body bent gracefully, her tendrils flicking with subtle signals. He noticed a faint smile on her face, though her posture remained disciplined. "You've learned well," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Jake nodded. "I'm learning from the best." She inclined her head in acknowledgement, her skin rippling in a pattern that to Jake seemed almost like laughter. It was a moment of connection, silent and profound, bridging the gap between human and Xeran understanding. As the week progressed, Jake and Lyra faced smaller malfunctions, minor crises, and routine tasks, but each challenge reinforced their growing bond. Jake's admiration for her deepened, not only for her skill but for her discipline, humility, and intelligence. Lyra in turn began to trust him fully, relying on his human ingenuity and willingness to observe and adapt. One evening, as the station rotated to face the distant suns, Jake reflected on the lessons he had learned. The bending gestures, once awkward and confusing, now felt natural, even inspiring. They symbolized patience, focus, and a profound understanding of one's environment. He realized that humans often underestimated the power of observation and the importance of learning from those who seemed ordinary but were extraordinary in ways that were not immediately visible. A small message appeared on his console, written in intricate Xeran script. Jake translated it carefully. "Courage grows with understanding. Strength is shared, not displayed. You have begun to see." He smiled, knowing it was from Lyra. Her gestures, her guidance, her quiet brilliance, they were shaping him as much as he was helping stabilize the station. He had come to Ardent to work, to solve technical problems, and perhaps to make a name for himself among humans. Instead, he was discovering a new way to think, a new way to observe, and a new way to connect across cultures. That night, Jake lay in his quarters, eyes fixed on the swirling lavender clouds below the station. He thought about the challenges ahead, the systems yet to repair, and the unexpected lessons he had learned from a janitor who bent not out of obligation, but out of intelligence, respect, and a deep understanding of the galaxy. He realized that his journey was just beginning. Lyra's guidance had shown him that true strength came not from asserting dominance or power, but from observation, understanding, and partnership. The station, with its countless systems and alien inhabitants, was a test of patience, intelligence, and courage, and he was ready to face it not alone, but alongside someone who had already taught him more than he had ever imagined possible. The following days at Station Ardent were quieter, but the calm felt temporary, like the pause before a storm. Jake found himself fully immersed in his work, moving through the station with a newfound confidence. He had learned to anticipate Lyra's gestures, respond to her subtle signals, and even begin to mirror some of the Ziran customs. He bowed slightly when she bent low, and she acknowledged his effort with a faint, approving ripple of color across her skin. Despite the progress, Jake's curiosity about Ziran culture remained insatiable. He watched how Lyra interacted with other crew members, noticing subtle differences in her bending. With some, she bent lower, slower, with deliberate pauses. With others, she bent lightly, almost casually. It was a code, a social language he was beginning to decipher. One afternoon, the station's communications panel announced the arrival of a visiting delegation from the Varelians, a species known for their strict hierarchy and precise etiquette. Jake felt a twinge of nervousness. He had studied some protocols, but the Varelians' reputation for testing newcomers made him uneasy. Lyra approached him, bending low in her customary manner. Her skin shimmered with a steady violet pattern that indicated focus. The delegation will observe human and Ziran interactions. Your behavior must reflect understanding and respect, she said. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. I'll try. You will do more than try, Lyra replied. Observation and adaptation will guide you. Remember, gestures carry meaning. Words are insufficient. As the delegation entered the main chamber, Jake watched them carefully. Their multiple limbs moved in perfect synchrony, eyes flickering rapidly as they communicated with each other. Lyra bent low, her gestures fluid and precise, guiding Jake through a complex dance of etiquette. She signaled when to step forward, when to pause, when to speak, and when to remain silent. Jake followed her instructions, awkward at first, but gradually finding the rhythm. He imitated her movements, bending slightly when necessary, keeping his gestures subtle yet deliberate. To his relief, the Varelians responded positively, their multiple eyes flickering in what Jake interpreted as approval. After the delegation departed, Jake let out a long breath. I didn't know gestures could be so powerful, he said. They are, Lyra replied. They convey trust, respect, and understanding. Spoken words are limited, but movement can communicate intention, alignment, and awareness. Jake realized how much he had underestimated nonverbal communication. Human culture relied heavily on speech, but the Ziran approach was more holistic, integrating observation, subtle signals, and conscious movement. Lyra's bending was not just a custom, it was a sophisticated tool for navigation, diplomacy, and collaboration. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra continued their collaborative work. They repaired complex systems, stabilized energy conduits, and tested new protocols for station efficiency. Each task was an opportunity to deepen their silent dialogue, to refine their understanding of each other's methods and cultural norms. During one late-night shift, Jake noticed Lyra studying him as he recalibrated a minor interface. She bent slightly, her hands resting near the floor, and tilted her head in a gesture that seemed both curious and approving. You have adapted quickly, she said. Your observation has improved. You are beginning to understand the Ziran approach to systems, social structure, and communication. Jake smiled, feeling a swell of pride. I couldn't have done it without you. Your guidance, it makes everything clearer. Lyra's eyes flickered with a soft glow. Guidance is mutual. You provide insight, adaptability, and intuition. These complement my knowledge. Together we accomplish more than either of us alone. Their growing understanding was tested the next day when an unexpected security alert was triggered. A minor containment breach in the station's biolab required immediate attention. Jake and Lyra rushed to the scene, finding a section of the lab sealed behind a security barrier. Strange bioluminescent spores floated in the air, their pattern shifting unpredictably. This containment is unstable, Lyra said, bending low to assess the situation. We must proceed carefully. One wrong move could compromise the lab and the surrounding systems. Jake nodded, trusting her guidance. Together they maneuvered through the lab, Lyra using subtle gestures to signal safe paths, while Jake adjusted human-engineered controls to stabilize the environment. Every movement was coordinated almost like a silent conversation. He realized that the Xiran way of observing and signaling was a form of teamwork, far beyond what he had experienced among humans. As they worked, Jake noticed that Lyra's bending gestures had layers of meaning. A slight tilt indicated caution, a deeper bow indicated trust, and a sweep of her hands signaled opportunity or direction. He followed her cues instinctively, feeling a growing sense of harmony between human and Xiran logic. By the time the breach was contained, Jake felt exhilarated and exhausted. Lyra stood straight, her skin glowing in a calm, steady pattern. "You performed well under pressure," she said. "You have learned to adapt, observe, and anticipate. That is the mark of understanding." Jake realized that their partnership was evolving. He was no longer just a human engineer navigating a foreign station. He was part of a team that transcended species boundaries. The combination of human creativity and Xiran discipline created a synergy that neither could achieve alone. In the following days, the station hosted a cultural exchange event. Crew members from multiple species gathered to share knowledge, celebrate diversity, and learn from each other's customs. Jake watched as Lyra moved through the crowd, bending in her customary way, yet managing to convey authority, respect, and friendliness simultaneously. Jake observed her interactions, noting how the subtlety of her gestures affected others. Humans were initially awkward around her, unsure how to interpret her movements, but they gradually adapted following her cues. Xirans treated her with familiarity and respect, responding to nuances in her posture and color signals. Other species, curious and cautious, mirrored her gestures when appropriate. Jake approached her during a quiet moment. "It's amazing how everyone responds to you. Your gestures, they communicate so much more than words ever could." Lyra inclined her head slightly, her tendrils flicking in a pattern of muted violet. "Gestures are universal. Words are limited. Movement carries intention, emotion, and understanding. Humans must learn to observe and respond." "You are learning," Jake smiled. "I think I'm getting it." "You are," she said. "Observation, adaptation, and respect. That is the path to understanding across cultures." The event also presented challenges. A delegation from a particularly formal species, the Kalari, arrived unexpectedly. They were known for testing newcomers through subtle social traps, relying on observation and precise etiquette. Jake felt tension rising. He glanced at Lyra, who bent slightly, signaling calm and readiness. Following her cues, Jake navigated the interaction carefully. He observed the Kalari's subtle movements, adjusted his gestures, and responded appropriately. Lyra provided silent guidance through slight shifts in posture and color patterns, ensuring he stayed aligned with proper etiquette. The Kalari left the chamber with apparent approval, and Jake felt a surge of relief. "That was intense," he said quietly to Lyra afterward. "Observation and respect prevent failure," she replied. "Every culture has rules, spoken and unspoken. Awareness is the key to harmony." In the following week, Jake and Lyra continued their collaborative projects. They repaired energy conduits, upgraded environmental systems, and improved safety protocols. Each task reinforced their understanding of one another, blending human ingenuity with Xiran discipline. Jake had come to value not just her skill, but her philosophy. Every action mattered, every gesture communicated, and every choice carried weight. One evening, as they completed a routine systems check, Jake paused to watch Lyra move through the bay. Her bending gestures, once puzzling, now seemed graceful and deliberate, a living language of focus, respect, and intelligence. He realized that he had learned more than engineering or alien systems. He had learned patience, humility, and the subtle power of observation. Lyra noticed his attention and bent slightly, her hands resting near the floor. "You are reflecting," she said. "Reflection is important. Understanding requires pause, attention, and thought." Jake nodded. "I'm learning more than I expected. About the station, about you, about everything." Her tendrils shimmered faintly, a gesture of approval. "Then your efforts are successful. Observation leads to understanding. Understanding leads to harmony. That is the path humans may follow here." Jake realized that his experience on Station Ardent had changed him. He had arrived as a skilled engineer, confident in his abilities but untested in the complexities of alien culture and technology. Now he was a student of observation, a participant in cross-species collaboration, and a partner to someone whose skills and intelligence had humbled him. As he prepared for rest that night, Jake reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Lyra's bending gestures, her subtle signals, and her unwavering discipline had taught him more than manuals or instructions ever could. She had shown him that intelligence was not always loud, authority was not always visible, and trust was built through action, observation, and respect. A small notification appeared on his console. A week later, Station Ardent experienced its most serious challenge yet. A sudden energy surge from a nearby stellar storm rippled across the station's shields, causing multiple alarms to sound simultaneously. Systems flickered and consoles lit up in erratic patterns. Crew members rushed through the corridors, their movements frantic and tense. Jake felt his heart race as he realized the station might face a catastrophic failure if the surge was not contained. He grabbed his toolkit and raced toward the core chamber, weaving through panicked engineers and technicians. At the entrance, he paused. The sight before him was chaotic. Sparks flew from damaged conduits, and the hum of unstable energy made the air vibrate with tension. Lyra appeared beside him, moving swiftly and bending low in her customary manner. Her tendrils shimmered with an intense violet light, signaling focus and urgency. "The surge is affecting multiple systems simultaneously," she said. "Containment is critical. Follow my instructions precisely." Jake nodded, his trust in her complete. They entered the chamber together, moving as a single unit. Lyra bent low, her gestures precise, guiding Jake through the complex web of alien technology. Each tilt of her body, each sweep of her hands, communicated information about pressure points, energy flow, and stability. "Redirect power to the auxiliary conduits," Lyra commanded, bending sharply to indicate the sequence. Jake adjusted the human-engineered controls while following her subtle signals. Sparks flew dangerously close, but he kept his focus, trusting her judgment. A sudden surge caused a conduit to overload, sending a burst of energy across the floor. Jake froze for a moment, but Lyra's hands swept in a controlled motion, signaling him to stabilize the panel. Acting quickly, he reconnected the energy flow, preventing a larger disaster. "You are performing well under pressure," Lyra said, her calm tone steadying him. "Observation and adaptation are key. Do not hesitate." Jake felt a surge of confidence. The lessons of the past weeks, the subtle gestures, the silent communication, the patient observation had prepared him for this moment. He moved with precision, following her cues, anticipating the needs of the systems and correcting errors before they could escalate. Hours passed in tense collaboration. The storm's energy surged unpredictably, forcing them to adapt continuously. Lyra's bending became a rhythm, a language of trust and guidance, and Jake responded instinctively. Together they stabilized the station's core, redirected power, and contained the surge before it could breach critical systems. Finally, the alarm ceased and the hum of the station returned to normal. Jake leaned against a console, exhausted but exhilarated. Lyra stood beside him, straight and composed, her tendrils glowing softly in a calm pattern. "You did exceptionally well," she said. "Your adaptation, observation, and responsiveness have proven invaluable. You are no longer merely a human engineer. You are a partner in maintaining this station." Jake smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "I couldn't have done it without you. You guided me every step of the way." Lyra inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Guidance is mutual. You provided insight, intuition, and action. Together we ensured stability. That is the true meaning of partnership." In the aftermath of the crisis, Station Ardent's leadership acknowledged the efforts of both Jake and Lyra. Crew members who had once overlooked the Janitor now understood her capabilities and intelligence. She had not only prevented disaster, but had also demonstrated the power of observation, patience, and subtle communication. Jake's growth was equally evident. He had learned to integrate human creativity with Xeran discipline, becoming an engineer capable of handling situations beyond his previous experience. In the days that followed, Jake found time to reflect on everything he had learned. He observed Lyra as she moved through the station, bending with precision, her gestures communicating more than words ever could. He realized that her customs, once confusing, had become a source of inspiration and guidance. One afternoon, a minor system failure in the hydroponics module provided an opportunity to test their skills in tandem. Jake and Lyra worked side by side, coordinating through silent gestures and subtle signals. Each movement carried meaning: a slight bend for caution, a tilt for priority, a sweep for action. Their collaboration was seamless, a dance of intelligence, trust, and mutual understanding. "You have truly mastered observation," Lyra said quietly as they finished the repairs. "You anticipate without explicit instruction. That is rare among humans." Jake laughed softly. "I've had a good teacher." Her tendrils shimmered in what he interpreted as amusement. "Perhaps, but you also chose to observe, to learn, and to adapt. That choice is yours alone." As the station settled into routine operations, a message arrived from the Galactic Alliance. They commended Station Ardent for maintaining stability during the stellar storm and highlighted the extraordinary efforts of its personnel. Lyra was formally recognized for her ingenuity, though her official title remained Janitorial Support, ASI, reflection of her humility and the Xeran approach to hierarchy. Jake's contributions were also acknowledged, emphasizing the importance of human ingenuity and cross-species collaboration. That evening, Jake and Lyra found themselves alone in the observation deck, gazing at the swirling lavender clouds of the planet below. The twin suns cast a warm glow, illuminating the station's intricate structure. "You have grown significantly," Lyra said softly, bending slightly in her customary gesture. "Observation, patience, and understanding are now part of your approach. You see beyond the obvious." Jake nodded, watching her movements. "I've learned that appearances can be deceiving, that even someone who seems ordinary can be extraordinary in ways you might never expect." Lyra inclined her head, her tendrils flicking in acknowledgement. "You understand. Strength is not always visible, intelligence is not always spoken, and trust is built through action, observation, and respect." A small silence fell between them, filled with mutual understanding. Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from confusion and curiosity to partnership and admiration. Lyra had guided him, challenged him, and revealed the depth of her culture, her skills, and her philosophy. "You've changed the way I see everything," Jake said quietly. "Not just the station, but how I think, how I observe, and even how I interact with people. And aliens." Lyra's skin shimmered faintly, a pattern that Jake had learned signaled approval. "Change comes from awareness. Awareness comes from observation. You chose to learn, and now you understand. That is the path to harmony." Over the next days, Jake continued to work closely with Lyra, but now their partnership had reached a new level. He anticipated her signals, she trusted his judgment, and together they handled complex tasks with efficiency and elegance. Their collaboration became an example for others on the station, demonstrating the power of combining human creativity with Xeran discipline. One morning, while performing a routine inspection of the station's external hull, Jake noticed a small panel damaged by micrometeoroids. He paused, unsure of the safest approach. Lyra bent low beside him, her gestures signaling the correct sequence of movements. Jake followed her guidance carefully, and together they secured the panel. "You handled that well," Lyra said, straightening with a faint ripple of violet light across her skin. "Precision and patience are now part of your skill set." Jake smiled. "I've learned from the best." As the days passed, Jake realized that Lyra's presence had transformed his understanding of human potential. The lessons she had taught, patience, observation, humility, and respect, were not limited to engineering or alien culture. They were universal principles applicable to life, leadership, and understanding others. One evening as they watched the twin suns set, Jake spoke softly. You've taught me more than I could have imagined. Not just about this station, but about understanding, partnership, and being better. Lyra bent slightly, a subtle, approving gesture. Then our efforts are complete. Knowledge shared, trust established, understanding achieved. That is the purpose of partnership. Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come to Station Ardent expecting challenges and technical work, but he had gained something far greater, the understanding that humans could adapt, learn, and thrive alongside other species, not by overpowering them, but by observing, respecting, and collaborating. As the station drifted silently in orbit, Jake realized that the story of the human and the janitor had reached a satisfying conclusion, yet it was also a beginning. Together, he and Lyra had proven that partnership transcended species, that intelligence and skill could be found in unexpected places, and that respect and observation were the keys to success in a universe full of unknowns. Jake leaned back, watching the planet glow beneath them. Lyra stood beside him, bending slightly, a constant reminder of discipline, wisdom, and the quiet power of understanding. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the station. Jake knew that whatever challenges awaited, he and Lyra were ready. Together, human ingenuity and Xeran brilliance would face the future, proving that even the most ordinary appearances could hide extraordinary potential. And so, as the stars gleamed beyond the station's windows, Jake closed his eyes, confident that he had found not just a mentor or a partner, but a new way of seeing the galaxy, a way to find. Alex had always believed that exploring the unknown was the highest form of adventure. As a human pilot, he had traveled to distant planets, charted uninhabited worlds, and witnessed phenomena that most people could only dream about. But nothing had prepared him for this small, hidden planet at the edge of the Orpheus sector. Its skies shimmered with shades of violet and green, and the air felt thick, almost alive, as if the planet itself were breathing. He had landed his ship in a clearing surrounded by enormous trees that glowed faintly in the twilight. The forest seemed peaceful, yet there was an unusual tension in the air. He stepped out, scanning his surroundings with caution. The terrain was unlike anything on Earth. Soft moss covered the ground, emitting a faint bioluminescent glow, and strange plants with spiraling leaves swayed even though there was no wind. Alex moved carefully, his boots pressing softly against the mossy ground. His mission was simple: explore, gather data, and return with information for the Space Exploration Council. But something about this place made him feel as if he were not alone. Then he saw her. At first, she seemed like part of the forest. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, catching the dim light, and her eyes glowed softly with a deep golden hue. Her skin shimmered slightly, reflecting the colors around her as though she were part of the planet itself. Alex froze, unsure if what he was seeing was real. "She's beautiful," he whispered to himself, hardly believing the words coming from his own lips. I wonder if she'd marry me." The thought startled him even as he said it quietly. He had never met anyone like her before, human or otherwise, and yet there was something about the way she stood there, silent and graceful, that made his heart beat faster. Lyra noticed him almost immediately. Her eyes, large and reflective, held a mixture of curiosity and caution. She did not speak in words, but her posture was open, and she took a few careful steps toward him. Alex felt both excitement and fear. He didn't know if she was friend or foe, but something about her presence drew him in like a magnet. He tried to speak softly. "I'm Alex," he said slowly, hoping she could understand. Lyra tilted her head slightly, watching him, then moved her hand in a gesture that seemed like a greeting. Alex mirrored the gesture cautiously, and she smiled faintly. It was the first connection, fragile but real. Before either of them could interact further, a sudden rustling in the bushes made Alex tense. Out of the shadows emerged a group of creatures, unlike anything he had seen. They were thin and agile, with sharp claws and glowing red eyes. They hissed in unison, circling him like predators. Without thinking, Alex jumped forward, using his training to defend both himself and Lyra. He dodged and weaved, striking with precision, using the environment to his advantage. The creatures were fast, but Alex's experience as a human pilot gave him an edge. He managed to drive them back temporarily, buying time for Lyra to step back to safety. Lyra watched, fascinated and a little fearful. She had seen many beings in her life, but none moved with such bravery and skill. When the last creature disappeared into the shadows, she cautiously approached Alex, placing a hand on his shoulder. There was a warmth in her touch, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and trust. Alex felt a surge of hope. This was the first time he realized that perhaps he was not just admired for his actions, but that a connection might truly be forming. As night fell, the forest came alive in a new way. Glowing plants lit the paths and soft sounds of alien wildlife filled the air. Lyra led Alex to a hidden shelter, constructed with living trees that bent and grew to form walls and a roof. It was small, cozy, and unlike anything humans had built. He felt honored that she would show him such a place, but also nervous. He was entering her world, one that few outsiders had ever seen. Alex tried to communicate, but words failed him. Lyra, patient and intelligent, used gestures and drawings to explain simple concepts: where food could be found, how to rest safely, and which areas of the forest were dangerous. Alex quickly realized that survival here required understanding more than just the environment. He needed to understand Lyra and her people. Over the next few hours, Alex observed her closely. She moved with an elegance that seemed effortless, and her eyes constantly scanned the forest as if she were attuned to every living thing around her. He was struck by her intelligence and her awareness of the world. She was not just beautiful. She was strong, wise, and completely in tune with her environment. He found himself thinking about her constantly. Every small gesture, every glance seemed to etch itself into his memory. He wondered how someone so different could be so human in her emotions, in her expressions. And every time he looked at her, the whisper returned in his mind. I wonder if she'd marry me. The night passed slowly. Alex could not sleep, partly from adrenaline and partly from the overwhelming wonder of being near her. He watched her move silently in the shelter, tending to small tasks and checking the surroundings. At one point, she glanced at him and their eyes met. For a moment, words were unnecessary. In that gaze, Alex felt a connection that transcended language or species, a silent understanding, fragile but undeniable. The next morning, they ventured outside together. The forest looked completely different in daylight. Sunlight filtered through the glowing leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Lyra pointed out edible plants and showed Alex how to avoid dangerous areas. He followed her carefully, realizing that this alien world was both beautiful and perilous. As they walked, Alex began to understand more about her culture. Lyra showed respect for every creature, every plant, and even the flowing rivers that crisscrossed the forest. Her actions reflected a philosophy that humans often missed. Harmony with the environment was more important than dominance. Alex admired this deeply. He felt that humans had much to learn from her people, and he secretly hoped he could show her that humans also had their strengths. Hours passed, and they returned to the shelter for rest. Alex felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every moment with Lyra deepened his fascination, and he realized that his initial whisper, about her beauty and wondering if she'd marry him, was no longer just a passing thought. It had become something more meaningful. Lyra noticed his gaze and smiled softly. This time, Alex felt certain that she understood at least a fraction of his feelings. Even if they could not yet be expressed in words, there was a silent acknowledgement between them, fragile yet full of possibility. Suddenly, distant noises reached them, sounds of other beings moving through the forest. Alex tensed, ready to protect her again if necessary. Lyra held up a hand, signaling calm, and then pointed toward the noises. They were not the same creatures from before. These beings seemed different, intelligent, and organized. Lyra's expression changed slightly. Caution replaced curiosity. Alex realized that staying here might not be as safe as he thought. But he also knew that leaving now, without understanding more about Lyra or her people, was impossible. Something kept him anchored to this place, to her presence. As night approached again, Alex and Lyra sat near the shelter, watching the glowing forest around them. The silence was comfortable, not awkward. He felt a bond forming, fragile but real. The whisper returned one last time before sleep overtook him. She's so beautiful. I wonder if she'd marry me. He didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time he felt that maybe, just maybe, this alien girl could become more than a fleeting dream. Maybe, in this strange world at the edge of the galaxy, Something extraordinary was beginning, and for Lyra, the human who had saved her life and stepped into her world so fearlessly, was no longer just an outsider. He was a curiosity, a puzzle, and perhaps in time something even more.